Hey everybody, it's Dr. Bob, and I'm here at the Great Unconformity just outside Las Vegas, Nevada. The Great Unconformity, I say? Yes. So instead of having to climb down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon to get a good view of it, here we are on the surface, and we're able to put our hand on the Great Unconformity, or this creation foundation rock, and then right next to it to put our hand on the sediments that were laid down at the beginning of the flood. So it's a great opportunity because we don't have to climb down the bottom of the canyon. But what does it teach us? Well, it's called the Great Unconformity because to non-biblical geologists, there's over 1.1 billion years of sediments missing. When they date the Great Unconformity and they date these sandstone layers that appear on top of it, they're missing 1.1 billion years. Now, the reason they're missing those sediment loads that they expect to be there is because as the fountains of the Great Deep opened up, and the waters began to rise throughout the earth, these original sediments that had existed on top of the Great Unconformity were stripped off. And so what we have is a polished, smooth, level surface. That's why it's called the Great Unconformity, because it exists in many places throughout the world. And from here to 150 miles away at the Grand Canyon, it obviously sits below all of us because it exists through most of the North American continent and in many places throughout the world. And so as those sediments were stripped off, they were then redeposited onto the surface, but now with new characteristics and new configurations and new organisms in them, because as they now were stripped off and were redeposited, we would have seen first the coastal systems, and then the animals that lived higher and higher elevations, those animals that were not able to escape or get away, would have then ultimately been deposited. So rather than exhibiting evolutionary history, what we see is a result of ecosystems being buried and trapped in these sediments as the floodwaters continue to rise higher and higher and higher. So with the Great Unconformity and the sandstone that's laid on top of us, we have a great opportunity to recognize that the events recorded in the book of Genesis are true. The biblical account is accurate, and it is demonstrated in the features that we see in the world. So when people tell you there's no evidence for the Bible, no, there is everywhere, and we can predict what that evidence will be. When we say that when that great flood came, it would have stripped all these sediments off and redeposited them, that's exactly what we see. It's a similar deposit to what we see at Mount St. Helens, when the high flow of water with a heavy sediment load was deposited, that it would have stratified, and it would have created this layering, which is exactly what we see here. And of course, in Mount St. Helens, a very, very minor event in comparison to the great forces that were at work in the flood of Noah's day. So this is a great opportunity for us to get up close and personal and witness those events and actually touch creation rock. In addition, it tells us a lot about the forces that are at work that were at work in the world through the flood and at the end of the flood. We know that there was great tectonic activity in that period immediately after the flood, and what we've seen is that it slows down. So we still have occasionally earthquakes that can be very significant and very severe, but when we look at the world and the catastrophic forces that have formed it, we realize that in comparison to the forces that created those features, the earth movement and the earth activity that we see now is fairly insignificant and minor. So even when we see a flood, we're able to get glimpses of these forces that were working the flood, but then we have to multiply that by immense amounts of water and force and energy that would have then been working on the earth during the time of the flood. The other thing we see as these fractures occurred in the crust, we always hear about California falling off into the ocean, but as these forces were at work and California began the part that is now California began to move away, it would have created great fractures, which we still live with the consequences of those fractures. We call them earthquake faults or fault lines. And where in the Grand Canyon we see these sediments stacked one on top of each other, what we have here is that they have laid on their side. So as those forces pulled these fractured sediments apart, they then start to fall over just as dominoes would. And now instead of climbing up to see all the sediment layers, you're able to walk across the top of them. So as we walk across these hills and as we we look at these different sediments that were deposited, we have the opportunity to walk through the days of the flood. It's an amazing opportunity, amazing experience to actually be able to see these sediments that were laid down in the flood and to walk across them instead of having to climb up a great canyon to get to them. So once more, it's an opportunity for us to recognize that it's okay to believe that the truth of God's Word is everywhere as we look around us. And we shouldn't be discouraged when people try to reinterpret the evidence to fit other worldviews that aren't supported really by the evidence when we look at it critically. So it's a great opportunity. We're glad to be here. And so it's Dr. Bob here at the Great Unconformity just outside Las Vegas, Nevada.